The atmosphere of Provence is heady. The scents of rosemary, lavender, thyme, fennel, olive oil, garlic, the clicking of the cicadas, and of course the food and the wine. I think it's the best region of France. Although a year in Provence might be a little de trop, but everyone should come here for at least a month. This week we'll be finding out how rosé wine is made. Obviously, we'll be looking at the Provençal food and trying to get the sense of wonderful smells that you get from this beautiful country. And of course, we'll be tasting two splendid wines, a red from the Luberon Mountains and a delicate rosé from the Côte d'Aix-en-Provence. I hope you've got yours ready, because if you have, pull the corks out now. Provence is that wonderful region that stretches from south of Lyon to Marseille, where goats graze on herb-scented mountains under the olive trees, where soft fruits and asparagus prosper in the fertile Rhone Valley, and old men play boule under the shade of plane trees. The food is perhaps the best in France, and although Provence is not really rated for its wines, I love them. Oh dear, the sun that so inspired Van Gogh is absolutely crucifying us today, JP. The sun that has helped make the wine we're drinking, isn't it? Rosé.
Yes, that's right. I
think it's great rosé weather.
It is. I think it also sent old Vincent fairly barking mad. But yeah, we're going to taste a rosé.
Why does rosé have such a down market, such a naff image? I mean, I'm actually very fond of rosé wines.
I mean, I think, to be honest, it's really down to the sort of rosé wines that dominate, particularly in the UK, because we've grown used to the rosés from the Loire, you know, the sort of Anjous and things like this, and of course quite a lot of Portuguese rosé. And both those styles tend to be medium or sweet. And to be honest, I think they just seem to have built up a rather passé image, you know, it's just that. And because we're not really exposed to the decent rosés from southern France, like the Provence we're tasting here, or some of the rosés from northern Spain, all of which are in the dry style, it's been left with this rather sort of gruesome image, as you say, all of which is a great shame, as you know.
Not one that I share, I happen to have, because I'm very, very fond of rosé. I mean, there's some classic ones from Provence de Mendotte, for example, the various Gris de Gris rosés, which are very, very fruity but very dry at the same time.
Yes.
And especially, I mean, would you believe this? When we make these programs, we're always complaining. We have to complain. We're either in blizzards 1 minute or in intolerable sun the next.
It's melting. Anyway, down to the stressful business of tasting.
Oh, yes. Relieved by the pleasant business of drinking. Get on with it.
On the appearance, the first thing to notice, obviously, rosés tend to have a pale colour, as we all know, but there is quite a lot of variation in the colour of a rosé wine. The one we've got here is almost a sort of orangey, coppery sort of colour, quite a deep colour for a rosé, whereas people at home may be looking at their rosé and seeing almost one with a sort of baby pink colour. There's also an element of age as well, that rosé wines take on colour very quickly, and of course, generally speaking, rosé is not a wine to keep, and of course, with age, the colour will darken. So it's
so drink 'em young, drink 'em quick, and drink 'em cool.
Exactly. On the smell, now with rosé, you're never going to get a very powerful smell. It's always going to be fairly light in character, and the thing to look for is just a simple, clean fruit character.
Which this seems to have.
Yeah, it's perfectly straightforward. It's not got any great depth or complexity of smell, just a sort of vague fruitiness, I don't know, a hint of strawberry or something like that. But,
Rhubarb.
Rhubarb.
No, it was a comment, not an observation.
Anyway, on to the taste. Oh, thank goodness that's chilled. Yeah, it's nice and dry. Of course, with this sort of heat, the acidity level is going to be quite low. And again, very light taste, isn't it? Simple fruitiness.
Yeah.
And a fairly short finish. Obviously, you know, there's no massive length. But I think for this sort of wine, which I don't know what you think, is primarily a glugging wine.
Absolutely. But it's very, very refreshing.
Yeah.
It is refreshing. Do you find it refreshing? I mean, imagine we've just had a game of boule or croquet or something like that. You step back into the cool inside the house where we should be anyway, but we can't be because we want to, you know, it's too dark, there's no electricity in there. It's so refreshing.
Yeah.
So agreeable.
I think that's the joy of it. It's obviously the perfect wine to quaff on a hot day like this. But
and they're not high in alcohol, are they?
No, not vicious. I mean, they're usually about 12.5
yeah.
or something like that.
So you can safely have a couple of bottles.
But
each.
I don't know, what do you think of the food side? I'm never sure with rosé. I mean,
Well, I think it goes with absolutely anything in my view. And also it pleases people who are frightened of wine.
yes.
I find, it's been my experience, that when people are unsure,
Yeah.
then it's comforting to say, I have a rosé, please.
That's the beauty of rosé. It's very versatile.
But I don't subscribe at all, anyway,
Yeah.
that you must drink this with cheese and that with that. You must
Absolutely.
drink, on a day like this, you'd be a fool to open a heavy bottle of Hermitage or something
Yes,
like
that's right.
that.
Classic
You would.
Bordeaux wine. Yeah.
This is perfect for that,
Yeah.
for days like this.
No, I agree absolutely. Here's to dear old Vince.
And the Van Goghs, a terrific band, you know.
There is no doubt that rosé is a sunshine wine, but don't be put off by stories of rosé being made from banana skins or that it's a girl's drink. As Jake will explain, it's a serious wine.
Do you know, I have a friend called Peter, the surname beginning with G, who lives somewhere in Gloucestershire. Won't mention his name properly. He thinks that rosé wine is made by mixing white wine and red wine. Now, I know no one watching this programme believes that, but just in case there is somebody still stuck in the real dark ages, JP.
Well, yeah, you're right, absolutely gastronomic one. It's not a Maggi mix. It's actually made from black grapes to start with. And if you remember when we did the red wine making, the colour in the skin of a black grape is where we get the red colour from. So, but of course, as you know, when you squeeze a black grape, there's actually no colour in the juice itself. Now, if you remember with a red wine, they crush the black grapes and ferment with those grapes' black skins in there. And of course, over a period of up to a week, you will extract the dark red colour from the skins. The big difference with a rosé is once the black grapes have been crushed, those crushed black grapes only spend perhaps 6, 12, 24 hours in a vat like this with the juice. And of course, in that time, the lovely pink colour is extracted. And then they just drain off that pink juice, ferment it cool like a white wine. There's no real significant maturation. It's bottled young and fresh.
So now you know. So press your buttons if you still think rosé is naff. And I wouldn't be at all surprised after this programme if there isn't a run on this stuff. I hope they've got plenty in stock.
JP, I've been thinking, do French wine growers monitor contemporary drinking fads and fashions? I mean, because I was thinking that if, for example, they put all their grapes in one basket and decided to go for broke on rosé and the market swings to red, they're lumbered.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think some growers in the past have been a bit slow on that, but I think they've caught up. They realise that there are now fashions, you know, be it red rosé or white wine. As you know, there are particular grapes which seem to come in and out of vogue, or, you know, whether oak aging is the fashion of the day or not, you know. So I think they've had to be aware of that. I mean, I think the chap behind us here, he makes 1.7 million bottles at his own farm at this estate here. He's got to get it right, and I think he's moving his production more towards the red wine side of things. It's an important commercial decision, because he's not just making his own wine, he also runs a négociant business as well.
What exactly is a négociant?
Well, I suppose in simple terms, you can think wine being made roughly by 3 different types of people. The easiest idea to understand is a chap essentially owning his own farm, growing his own grapes, fermenting his own wine, maturing it, bottling it himself.
And that's invariably the best wine, isn't it?
Very often, I mean, because obviously he's almost cared for it from cradle, not to grape, but to bottle, you know. And you often see that on the label, you know, it says mise en bouteille au château or mise en bouteille au domaine. The négociant I was mentioning here, that's more where, as well as making perhaps one's own wine, you actually buy in wine from other growers, and that could be wine or grapes. So it's a sort of middleman. The third option really is where obviously owning a winery is a fairly expensive business. So what happens, particularly down here in the south of France, is growers club together, and in effect 20 or 100 of them would jointly own a winery, a cooperative winery, supply their grapes to it, the cooperative makes the wine and then markets it. So it's really those 3 different ways of making wine, I think.
Well, that seems perfectly clear, doesn't it? Well done, JP. Thank you.
Anyway, after all that academic stuff, I think I deserve a little break. Apart from the wines of this region, which I enjoy very much, it would be sacrilege to come all this way and ignore the fine foods on offer. So I made my way to the coast.
The Brits are really fond of tuna fish. They love it in the tins and in salads with eggs and hard-boiled potatoes and stuff like that. But here in the Mediterranean, the tuna fish is really revered and esteemed. A big slice of this, cooked with olive oil and garlic on a grill, is really considered to be absolutely excellent. But sadly, it's one of those fish that we are overfishing. And people with daughters about the age of 2 will probably only ever see one of these in a zoo.
Tuna may be one of the biggest fish on offer, but what's so fantastic is the variety you'll find here. Wonderful, delicious and different fish, crabs, lobsters and all sorts of other crustacea. But it's not just the fish which is so wonderful here. I went off to a little village called Ile-sur-la-Sorgue to find some other Provençal delights. Take a stroll round any Provençal market and you'll be delighted with the variety of scents, flavours, colours and aromas of the outstanding produce. Everything you need for a snack or a feast. Now let me see, what shall I cook? Well, I've made up my mind and I've started without you.
So we have our garlic. Now, the whole idea is I'm going to make a speciality dish which was actually brought to the Mediterranean and to Provence thousands of years ago by the Phoenicians, by the Greek traders who came here trading, I don't know in what, tin, diamonds, herbs, spices and stuff. And it's beautifully poached fish. For example, we've got a grey bream, a golden bream, sea bass, bar or lou as they're called here, red mullet and monkfish. Now all these fish take a different amount of time to cook. So first of all, Mike, if you come around here, I'm going to pop the monkfish in to this pot because he takes quite a long time to cook. And along with him, in the other pot, I'm going to put a yellow bream and a grey bream. Now we'll let those poach for about 5 or 6 minutes each, and then we'll add the rest. Right, so the fish is all cooked, as you can see, and that's absolutely splendid, but now I must make the sauce. And we make the sauce from the stock. First of all, put it into a completely separate pan, strain it through a sieve like that. First thing we do is add some fresh cream, like so, and whisk that gently in. You do this over a very low heat. The next thing we do is add in our garlic mayonnaise and whisk and whisk and whisk and whisk just very gently until it eventually cooks through and takes the consistency of custard. Although it doesn't, of course, taste like custard because it's full of olive oil, free-range egg yolks, garlic, lemon juice and cream. Good. The sauce has got the required consistency, so you pour that over the fish, like so. And these fish over here as well. And there we are. La bourride. Now, it's been a very hot and tiresome day. Personally, I'm in extremely bad mood because of the heat and because of the fact that yesterday or tomorrow, depending on which way this all appears, it rained like cats and dogs and we had to rearrange everything and we changed things and we did things. Anyway, we've succeeded. And I'm going to award myself a small drink from this magnum of Chateau Val Journeys. A good thing about a magnum is it's not quite enough for two, and it's a little bit too much for one, but I'll give it a good shot. Cheers. Now, here in Provence, they don't eat in a Parisian, sophisticated way. They eat really from the soil, the plat de terroir, the simple good things of the region. A possible simple starter might be crunchy, spicy radishes with sea salt and butter. Might be little pieces of fried bread in olive oil with tapenade, which is a puree of olives and olive oil, highly delicious. You might have some sea snails, bouleaux they're called, perhaps with just lemon juice, or maybe with some garlic mayonnaise. But with our prime dish, and back up to me for a second, please, Mark, with our prime dish, which is bass, mullet, monkfish, bream, poached simply in wine and vegetables and stock, would be served with little bits of fried bread with harissa, which is a very spicy pepper puree. Of course, the aioli would go on top as well, and some boiled potatoes tossed in olive oil with basil. But I haven't just been making this simple dish all day. I've been sweating over another and rather more winter speciality you will find down here. Something, sadly, you'll never be allowed to have in places like the United Kingdom because it's illegal. It is sheep's feet and sheep's tripe poached in herbs de Provence and tomato sauce. And it's an absolute classic dish of the region, and it's called pied et paquet. The pied refers to the sheep's feet, That's one of the sheep's feet. And the packets are the sheep's tripe, stuffed with things like parsley and mushrooms. And they're absolutely wonderful. So you have summer and winter from Provence here on this magnificent table. And although I said last week that Alsace is one of the finest gastronomic regions in France, and although I might say next week that wherever I'm going is very good, in my heart of hearts, I know that Provence has it all. Cheers.
Now, as we all know, good food deserves good wine. And after toiling away in that rather splendid kitchen, I'm certainly ready for some more slurping. So for our next tasting, we're heading for the Luberon Hills, just above Aix-en-Provence, for a drop of red. So if you're joining us for the tastings, stand by with your Côte de Luberon.
JP, this part of the trip, the holiday, the in-depth research we're doing on wine, sorry about that, which brings me to doing that bit about, 30 years ago when I was here for the first time, and the cold Mistral blew across these brutal Luberon mountains, you ducked into a little restaurant and you had a plate of cèpe fried with garlic and olive oil, and you had a thing called a civet de sanglier, which was a wild boar marinated in wine and served with a rich, thick, dark sauce. And they'd dump a bottle of Luberon red wine beside your table, part of the meal. It was not expensive, it wasn't good, it wasn't bad. I mean, you wouldn't exactly want to take it back with you. I remember it fondly, but times have changed enormously.
Yes, that's right. I mean, well, hopefully, as we'll see when we taste, this is actually a very, very good wine. But I suppose it still can be thought of as being a country wine,
Yeah, we think of it as a country wine. We paid lots of money to it, but you were dismissing it as a country wine.
Country wine is a term that's used a lot, and I suppose there's two ways to think about it. Technically, it's often the translation of Vin de Pays, which we'll be looking at more when we get to Languedoc. But I think it's used more loosely to mean a wine from a small, perhaps lesser-known region, so not a fancy Bordeaux or a fancy Burgundy, just a wine that fits into its local terroir, its local region, not one of the world's great wines, I think Luberon still fits into that sort of category.
But you can think about these things fitting into categories for a long time, JP. But, I mean, you could think about pouring
yes,
some.
The usual sledgehammer.
Yours is all ready, of course, I hope. Cork's out, everything like that, of course, yes. So, tell me all about this. Tell us all about this. We're all anxious, hanging on your every word, JP.
Well, here we go.
It's going to be deep red, you wait and see.
Yes. Yes, that's right, fairly deep red, rather strange. You can see it's a fairly young wine. It's a 95, so still quite sort of pink on the rim there.
A glance at the label will confirm that.
It always helps. So fairly youthful colour. On the nose, I think this is where things obviously start to get interesting. You've got this lovely ripe, soft red and black fruit character. And the story in terms of the grapes is quite interesting, that just over there, we're back in the Rhone Valley, and of course there we've come across things like the Syrah and things like the Grenache. This is actually made of that blend, so this is in that family of wines with quite a big proportion of Syrah, and when you smell it, it also has that lovely spicy, peppery side, particularly I think associated with the Syrah. But I think that's just delicious, that smell.
It's got a Chateauneuf du Pape sort of feel about it, to my mind. I don't know what you think, but I mean, actually, this is in, I mean, let's taste it for heaven's sake. This is, to my mind, as good as almost any of the Côte de Rhône villages that we tried, and as good as any of the worst Chateauneuf du Papes I've had.
Yes, absolutely. As you say, it's much better than some of the ropier Chateauneufs. And then on the taste, it's dry, as we'd expect. Low acidity, lovely soft character, and that's obviously to do with the climate here down in the south. Reasonable warmth of alcohol, and very soft tannins. There are no sort of rough edges, very smooth in character. Obviously not one of the world's profound wines, but a lovely sort of wine. And I think it fits that description we were talking about earlier, a country wine. And of course, the advantage of that is the price. It's very, very moderately priced,
Oh, well, I suppose that's all right. This is really very good.
To the south.
To the south, and more south, as far as I'm concerned.
The vineyards of Valjoanus, where our particular wine comes from, are tucked away in the Luberon Mountains. 1,000 acres in all, half of which is in vines. But before you reach for your checkbooks to buy a few acres in Provence to start your own winery, I'd better warn you, you may be able to buy some land, but you'll never get permission to plant any vines.
So why can't they plant them where they wish?
Well, the European Union, and France as part of that, has a fundamental problem in overproducing wine. And by banning the plantation of new vineyards, it's a fairly crude but somewhat effective way of stopping this overproduction. But the reason I brought you into the vineyard on this particularly fine morning...
Oh, lovely. Lovely.
Knowing what joy it gives you...
I tremble with anticipation.
...was to show you this young vine here, probably only about sort of 3 years old, something like that. But what you can see is that we've got the European vine, and this is the vine obviously producing the grapes which you and I are going to drink, hopefully at some stage. But the European vine has been grafted, and you can just about see it here, grafted onto what's called an American rootstock, actually an American vine, which is growing underground. What they do this for is that in the last century there was the most catastrophic disaster really in most of the world's vineyards. There's a pest called phylloxera, like a tiny green fly aphid thing, which lived down in the soil and destroys the roots of the European vine. And this pest got out in the sort of 1850s, 1860s and annihilated many of the classic vineyards, not just in France, but all around the world. And things looked very, very bleak until some bright spark noticed that the vines growing in America, the American vine, actually can cope with this pest. So, of course, the answer was to take the European vine and then graft it onto an American rootstock.
My friend Peter was absolutely right. Look. This is a rosé vine, it is, because it's got white grapes and black grapes, so you do mix them together to make rosé.
Well, I mean, we've actually caught this at just the right moment, because you can see these grapes here are just changing colour. But in fact, you can see this vine is actually a multi-purpose one, because it's also got some white grapes here. Up until this stage, all grapes have been green like this. And then at a key stage, usually at the end of July, beginning of August, you can see the black colour starts to form in the skin of the grape. And this is at a perfect stage, and it's just halfway through the change. And if we came back in a week's time, they'd all be black.
Jonathan, in a week's time, I should be on the stands at Richmond Rugby Club having a pint.
Now there's a thought. You don't get masters of beer, do you? Or maybe you do, it's just I've never seen one. Anyway, while JP works himself into a lather over the vines, I've decided it's definitely time for me to grab another glass and cool down.
Well, I'm really sorry this week's come to an end. I've had a fabulous time. But it doesn't matter, because next week we're on to the Languedoc, where we're going to be tasting some Minervois and some Vin de Pays d'Oc Viognier. So make sure you get yours and join us for another happy, merry slurping session. See you next week.